Fred and Ethel Mertz, the wonderful renters next door on I Love Lucy, are one of the most famous couples in TV history, but there was something wrong behind the laughs. No one saw the stress. There was a cold void between takes, and the anger began early and never left. We finally know what was going on behind the scenes after all these years. William Frawley was completely hated by Vivian Vance. The reason is deeper, sharper, and much more personal than anyone thought, as you're about to find out. The ideal pair on TV, 1951 was a turning point for American TV. ABC has a new show on the air. What was it called? I Love Lucy. And it was the most popular show on TV very quickly. Everyone in the family gathered around the TV every week to watch Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, Vivian Vance, and William Frawley play one of the most important ensemble groups in the history of sitcoms. Lucy and Ricky Ricardo, a crazy redhead with dreams of being in show business, were the center of the show. Rich Cuban band leader Ricky was Lucy's husband, but right next door, something just as memorable was taking place. People quickly fell in love with Fred and Ethel Mertz, who were the Ricardos' owners and best friends. Fred was the tight-fisted, often grumpy former vaudevillian who always had a scowl on his face. He had a sarcastic and patient wife named Ethel. She was quick with a comeback and an eye roll, and she was always down for Lucy's latest plan. Together, they gave the main couple's chaos a layer of comedic grit and a more grounded tone. People loved Fred and Ethel Mertz, who were America's second pair. As the characters, William Frawley and Vivian Vance, the actors who played them had decades of experience on the job. William's casual timing matched Vivian's emotional intensity. With one raised eyebrow, she could get in a funny line. With one dry comment, he could bring down the whole scene. They weren't pretty, but they were real. You could have thought they were friends or family who fought over everything but still loved each other. There was clear chemistry between them. The grumpy grumbling from Fred and the cutting sarcasm from Ethel worked. They were giving performances that set the standard for what a comedy sidekick could be like. Even more importantly, they helped lay the groundwork for the whole genre. At a time when most TV couples were polished, perfectized versions of American family life, Fred and Ethel were more real and easy to relate to. A fight broke out, plans were made, and each other was called out. That they were known made them loved. The chemistry between them looked great on video. But history would show that the kindness and teamwork we saw on TV ended as soon as the cameras quit rolling. The strain that was building just below the surface was never shown to the public and wasn't talked about for decades. Working together looked easy on TV, but it was actually one of the most famously tense relationships in TV history. But in the early 1950s, no one knew about any of that. It was a huge hit, that I Love Lucy. It was even the most watched show in America by the end of its second season. It stayed in the top 3 for almost the whole 6 seasons. In those days, more than 10 million homes watched every week, which was a huge amount, and Fred and Ethel were very important to that success. They weren't just side figures, they were a part of the magic move. She even made history when she became the first actress to win an Emmy for Best Supporting Character in a Comedy Show. Because of how she played Ethel Mertz, comedic actors who didn't look like typical leading ladies were able to get jobs. She wasn't as pretty as Lucy, was older, and didn't feel bad about being herself. While that was going on, William Frawley added an old-school grit to the show. He had been in theater in Hollywood before, and people loved how he gave Fred Mertz a stingy charm and a worn-out edge. He didn't have to say much for a scene to work. He only had to show up, frown, and say something sarcastic. In many ways, he was the perfect example of a grumpy sitcom husband before it became a cliché. Both of them were very dangerous when put together, but in more than one way. Still, everyone saw success in the first few years of I Love Lucy. The show changed everything about sitcoms on TV. A 3-camera setup that would become standard in the business was used to film it in front of a live crowd. It was the first TV show to be shot on 35mm film, which meant that the scenes could be kept and shown again. It even talked about pregnancy, which wasn't common at the time. In an episode that drew over 44 million people, Lucy gave birth to Ricky. Fred and Ethel were right in the middle of everything. They kept the Ricardos' crazy pranks in check with their dry wit and realistic middle-aged views. It was a great match. The laughs kept coming. People loved the show, but nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. People talked about Fred and Ethel at home. People watched reruns of the show for decades without understanding that the two actors were so nervous that they could hardly stand to be in the same room. They behaved like a truly lovely old married couple. But there were no more bets once the cams were turned off. Back when TV was at its best, stars didn't air their dirty laundry in public. Studios looked out for their stars. The tabloids hadn't yet made every fight between cast members into big news. Things that were going wrong between Vivan and William stayed quiet for a while. Fans learned that the truth about Fred and Ethel was very different from what they thought as the years went by and new stories came out. What began as stress at work turned into full-on hatred over time. She really hated William Frawley. Vivian Vance didn't just dislike him. We'll soon start to understand why, behind the scenes. From the very first day of filming for I Love Lucy, it was clear that Vivan Vance and William Frawley's relationship would be more unstable than anyone thought. It all began with a comment, one line that would make people angry for years to come. The cast of I Love Lucy got together for the first table read to go over the script, get a feel for their roles, and find a flow. The people in the room were still getting their bearings, but even at that early stage, Vivan was worried. She wasn't afraid to say them either. The story goes that Vivan, who had known she didn't like being cast with someone 22 years older than her, joked to someone nearby that William looked old enough to be her father instead of her husband. She didn't tell him that. She didn't yell it, but it was loud enough. William heard her and will always remember it. William fought hard for the part and had something to show after being ignored in Hollywood for years. The comment made him look bad in public. He was an old-school actor who grew up in the rough and tumble world of theater, where one had to show respect. He also thought Vivan had treated him badly before the first scene was even shot. That was the end of the relationship for good. William was said to have hated her from the start. His language toward her was sometimes private and sometimes not so private, and it was not at all professional. He is said to have called Vivan that miserable C***NT later in the show's run, which is one of its most memorable lines. Over the years, the quote has been used in different ways. The exact situation may be forgotten, but the hate that went into it is still there. There was a clash of personalities and a dislike. Vivan didn't hold back either. She thought William was rude, stuck in the past, and unwilling to change. It was hard for him to work with others, and he didn't like practicing much. People knew him for hitting his goals but staying away, and he didn't like being told what to do or given advice. Vivan, who had been on stage many times and knew a lot about timing and organization, thought his behavior was rude and disrespectful. Their characters and the way they worked together were very different. Vivan was right on. She liked to practice a lot. She went over her scenes and made them better. William, on the other hand, liked to do things just once and be done with them. He came from a time when people laughed and moved on. He didn't have time for artists who wanted to work on a line. There was also the matter of drinking. It was said that Frawley never showed up to work drunk, which was a strict rule set by Daisy Arno. People knew him as a big drinker everywhere he went. Vivan knew it, she didn't like it. Because they were different ages and because of how Frawley did his job, she felt like she had to carry more of the weight in their scenes. Both of them didn't like each other, but William showed his dislike more often. He would make fun of Vivan's looks, the way she acts, and even her voice behind closed doors. He made fun of her, rolled his eyes at her notes, and insulted her without thinking twice when he felt like it. Meanwhile, Vivan tried to stay away from him whenever she could. She often let the team know that she didn't feel comfortable around him. Still, it's amazing that they never let it get on the screen. Even though they were angry with each other, they behaved like professionals when the red light came on. As Fred and Ethel, they gave clean, smart, and funny performances. The audiences had no idea what was going on. In fact, their fight off-screen may have made their relationship more exciting on screen. The stress made their talk more interesting. It was funny to be sarcastic. The sass, the side eyes, and the one-liners. They didn't have to lie. No matter how much they didn't like each other, they never messed up the work. They were on time, said their lines, and never skipped a beat. They knew that the show was bigger than their fight in many ways. I Love Lucy was a huge hit in popular culture, which was good for both of them. They didn't need to like each other. They just kept coming back, and they did that for 6 whole seasons. The split never went away, though. It stopped being about what was said and more about what was never settled. The anger grew stronger. The stress got harder. There were no peace talks or olive trees. During the whole run of the show, they never got close or even just got along. They talked when the script told them to. That was it. There were no warm backroom moments or happy memories of rap parties. There was only cold professionalism held in place by mutual dislike. Why did all of this happen? William would never forgive Vivian for what she said at that table read. He took his anger with him to the grave, but the fight wasn't just a private matter anymore. More and more people heard that there was trouble between the stars as the show became more popular. The cast and company knew what was going on. Ball was aware of it. I'm sure Daisy Arn is new. As the seasons went on, the tension became part of the show's lore, and fans talked about it behind laughs at the lines. The most interesting thing is that no one in the crowd saw the cracks. People still liked Fred and Ethel Mertz, a grumpy but lovable married couple who fought like pros but always found a way to get along. Things were different off-screen. That anger would come back to haunt them both as the show wound down, especially when a new chance came up. A chance to get Fred and Ethel back. A follow-up show, The Follow-Up. I Love Lucy was coming to an end by the late 1950s. It was clear that the show's golden age was coming to an end after 6 groundbreaking seasons, and the switch to one, our Lucy-Daisy comedy hours. But CBS officials and Desilu Productions weren't ready to let go of everything, even though Lucille Ball and Daisy Arn were getting ready to leave the light of Ricardo. Behind the scenes, one idea was slowly gaining support. A spin-off about Fred and Ethel Mertz, the Ricardos' neighbors. At least for the network, it made sense. A lot of people liked Fred and Ethel. They were in a class of their own. They were biting, funny, and realistic, and most importantly, they showed a very different side of life than Lucy and Ricky. It was possible to learn more about what life would be like for a middle-aged pair juggling work, marriage, and money if the Ricardos weren't in it. Daisy Arnaz, who was always a director and businessman, saw a chance and asked Vivian Vance and William Frawley to be in their own show. They were going to be the stars of a half-hour sitcom based on their I Love Lucy identities. It might have been a big break for both of them. The offer was a treat for William. He was almost 70. He knew that I Love Lucy had given his career a second chance after a long break from movies. It meant more work, more money, and more attention when there was a spin-off. And everyone said that William would not turn down a good paycheck. He said yes almost right away. That is, Vivian didn't. She didn't even think twice about it. Her answer was a clear and firm no. Vivian couldn't stand the thought of working with William on another show, especially one where they would be on the same level every day. The reason she put up with William was because of I Love Lucy. The show was a hit and Lucille Ball stood by her. She did have a choice now, though. Nothing made her blink as she turned it down. She said something. She was no longer Ethel Mertz. She was no longer Fred's Ethel, though. Being turned down hurt a lot. From William's point of view, it was a violation. He finally had the chance to have his own show. She was taking away the lead role, regular pay, and the attention because of her. The woman he had hated for years was now in the way of what he thought would be a great chance to boost his career. So the fight got worse. Whatever chance there was of getting along again was gone. The offer was made in good faith by Daisy Arnaz, but after Vivian turned it down, the idea was said to have been dropped. Without them, there would be no Fred and Ethel. The Mertzes won't be getting a second act. Instead, their last scenes together were kept in the other Lucy-Daisy Comedy Hour episodes. Behind the scenes, everyone knew that their relationship was only for business. They were still funny and smart. There was no longer any chance of working together again. She hated William Frawley very much. We now understand why. The story doesn't end here, though. The last blow. The I Love Lucy phase was over by 1966. William Frawley was living in Hollywood in peace. His health had never been great, but it was getting worse. He was almost 80. William had a heart attack on March 3 that year while going down Hollywood Boulevard near the Knickerbocker Hotel, which had been his home for a long time. It was too late for the nurse from a building close to help. William was found to be dead at the age of 79. The death was in the news, but the honors were not heard. He didn't have any kids or a wife. The people he was closest to professionally were many times complex. Holly would never stopped for him except for one brief moment. There were a few short obituaries and polite nods to his work as Fred Mertz. There would be one story and one response to his death that would last longer than most of the official news coverage. Vivian Vance sent it. Several people who worked on the project say that when she heard that her I Love Lucy co-star had died, she raised a glass and said, "Champagne for everyone." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't said in a funny way. From what I heard, it was a real party. The picture did not show the moment. There was no red carpet or interview. Instead, only a quiet drink with friends at her home in California. The story stuck, though. It became one of the most talked about stories in the history of great TV over the years. One of the worst feuds in Hollywood history could be summed up in a single line. Vivan never said he didn't say it in public. In fact, in the years before she died, she apparently let everyone know how much she hated William. It is said that she told many times, "I really hate him. I still do." There is no doubt in her words. There was no effort to make it kinder or more professional with qualifiers. Vivan Vance's most famous part, Ethel Mertz, made a lot of people laugh, but she had a grudge that died with her. It stayed strong over time. Over time, that champagne toast became a story in its own right. Some versions of the story say that Vivan was having friends over when she got the call, and she got drinks for everyone. In others, she said it in a cold, final way and left it at that. There are different versions of the quote, but it has been used in cast biographies, retrospectives, and talks with people who worked on Dessous productions. Some former studio workers have tried to play down the event. They say it was overstated or that the comment was made joke-like and not seriously. Others, especially those close to Vivan, have backed it up over the years, saying that it was in line with how she spoke about Willem. Someone who knew Vivian's well and spoke to the press in the 1980s said, "Viv didn't just dislike Will, she despised him. It wasn't personal quirks or political differences, they were completely incompatible. Every day on set was like a Cold War, so when William died, everyone felt better." Vivan herself died of bone cancer 13 years later in 1979. In the last few years of her life, she talked about her time on I Love Lucy in interviews and praised Lucille Ball as a loyal friend and a great comedian. That woman was proud of the work she had done, but she never changed her mind about the man who played her husband. She saw him as bitter, mean, and hard to deal with. The actor who played Fred Mertz may have made people laugh, but to Vivan, he was never funny, just mean. The industry, on the other hand, never forced them to get back together. There were no public reunions or tell-all interviews. Some people think it was best that the feud stayed hidden in old scripts and reruns. Fans of I Love Lucy still believe in Fred and Ethel when they watch the show. They see the fighting, the charm, and the unwavering loyalty. They don't hear the slurs, insults, and years of backstage anger. But sometimes there's a truth sharper than any joke, legacy of a love-hate relationship. In 2012, decades after the first episode of I Love Lucy aired, both William Frawley and Vivan Vance were posthumously inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame. Their work on the show had become an important part of American comedy, and even though they were angry with each other off-screen, their effect on screen was undeniable. Many generations of TV viewers knew Fred and Ethel Mertz as the most famous neighbors on TV. Their relationship was copied, reworked, and praised in many sitcoms that came after. They were the models, and the actors who played them were very good. Vivan was one of the first supporting actresses on TV to be truly three-dimensional. She was funny, expressive, and sharp without being limited to a simple stereotype. For her role as Ethel Mertz, she won an Emmy in 1954, making history as the first person to win the award for Best Supporting Actress in a TV series. William was a great comedian, even though he was known for having a tough exterior. He had perfected his timing through years of vaudeville and early film work, and he brought a simple, honest quality to every line. But their story had a deeper lesson behind all of their success. The anger lasted for years, never ending or being forgiven, and it followed them long after the show ended. It's a reminder that talent alone doesn't always mean harmony, that even the best teams can have problems, and that great performances don't always happen because of good relationships. Sometimes they happen despite them. But their legacy is bigger than the fight. Reruns never stopped because people kept watching. New people found I Love Lucy through syndication, DVDs, and streaming services. The laughter never stopped, and even people who later learned about the tension behind the scenes still liked what Vivian and William did together. In the end, Vivian Vance and William Frawley didn't need to get back together to leave an impact. They had already done it. With every sarcastic jab, eye roll, and perfectly timed joke, they built something lasting, something bigger than themselves, that still speaks to people today. Did you ever see signs of their split while watching I Love Lucy? Let us know.